Trevor, we need your anti-rain dance.
I can see it's going to rain. It's coming.
My rain jacket doesn't move. Yeah. Yeah, if this gets wet, everyone will see the wash.
Has he got dogs?
No, he doesn't take dogs. No, so I'm the dog. I'm the good dog.
Probably stops the water going down the hole.
Who was the guy you were talking to?
Thank you so much, Grace. That was absolutely superb. I woke up this morning and I looked at the sky, and there wasn't a cloud in the sky, and I saw 4 planets to the east. And we've nailed the weather god, and my hubris come back to haunt. Well, welcome everybody to this gathering commemorating the 107th anniversary of the beach landings at Gallipoli. I'll get the warnings out of the way first, as I totally mistimed it last year. There's a possibility of a low-flying aircraft. Maybe the rain's changes plans there. It's not going to be a Lancaster or a Spitfire or an F-18. It's just going to be a Cessna. So just don't get the expectations too high there. Not sure of the timing. It'll be somewhere about 9 o'clock. Towards the end of the service, there'll be 3 shots fired from a high-powered rifle. It's very, very loud, but we'll give you a little bit of a warning for that. Those of you that want to sit down, feel free to sit down on a wet seat. Now I can see why you're all standing. Well done. For the first time ever, we're recording this service. Obviously, you won't be able to see everybody under an umbrella. There's a lot of people who can't be here due to ill health or precautionary measures, so we're going to put it on YouTube. So just be aware. Got a camera there. It's just taking this area here, so it's not panning in on the crowd or anything like that. On this day, we commemorate and reflect upon the events and sacrifices of the men and women who came from the uttermost end of the earth, Tapuhi being one of them. And we'd like to thank all those men and women who served when you answered the call and served our country and represented New Zealand in times of armed conflict. Sadly, this time is also a time of yet another war in Europe. While it's highly unlikely that New Zealand will become directly involved in military operations over there, be under no illusion that the Russian invasion of Ukraine has the potential to envelop Europe and the world in an unimaginable conflagration that the civilised world thought was of an era long past. For years, we've seen iconic images of headlines of economic refugees fleeing to Europe seeking a better life. Now, in scenes reminiscent of 1939, we're witnessing refugees fleeing from a European country.
For the peace and security we enjoy, which was won for us through the courage and devotion of those who gave their lives in time of war. And in these unsettled global times, we pray for the continuation of a safe and peaceful world. Amen.
Thank you very much, Lynn. We're very, very lucky to have a young man here who's a bugler for us this morning. First time we've had a bugler. We've got Kiri Takano is fashionably late. She'll be here in a couple of moments. So we'll just wait for her to our primary singer. She's been practicing this morning, but she's also looking after a baby. So they'll just stand at ease for a couple of moments when she comes up here. Quotes from the Bolshevik leadership meetings at the time revealed that when plundering Ukrainian agricultural wealth, no method was too extreme. Don't care that the starving die, 75% of the population will die. If not die, we will shoot them, then 25% will be submissive. We need Ukraine itself, we don't need the people. When direct Russian control of land and cattle began in 1929, the Ukrainian peasant farmers actively resisted. Stalin saw their rebelliousness as part of a wider Ukrainian effort to overthrow Soviet rule. Not wanting to lose control of Europe's main grain supply, he confiscated all the grain and land from the Ukrainian peasant farmers, deporting many of them to Siberia, thus creating an artificial famine. The country which previously produced the most grain in Europe was left without a crumb of bread. So began the Holodomor, where Stalin used starvation to crush the resistance of the Ukrainian people. At the peak of the Holodomor in the spring of 1933, over 24,000 Ukrainian people died every day, starved to death, a number far eclipsing that of the atrocities of the Third Reich a decade later. New Zealand is not amongst the 28 countries who recognise the Holodomor genocide, in spite of the petition in Parliament in 2020 calling for it to do so. Our government's response to this petition was a Jacinda classic, a word super pontification overflowing with mealy-mouthed pithy platitudes, such as, New Zealand has encouraged Ukraine and Russia to discuss the issue as the parties directly concerned, and hopes that a resolution on how to acknowledge this tragedy can be reached in the future. Our Be Kind leader is so far out of touch, needs to get off the fence. There is bugger all chance of that ever happening. There's a multinational force fighting for Ukraine made up of Polish,
War Baby by Pamela Holmes. A side of conflict that is less well documented is that of the wives of servicemen. Yet, in two short stanzas, a heavily pregnant Pamela Holmes, who had been widowed when her husband and the father of her child was killed in action, summed up the scale of her grief. He has not even seen you, he who gave you mortality. And you, so small, how can you guess his courage or his loveliness? Yet, in my quiet mind I pray, he passed you on the darkling way. His death, your birth, so much the same, and holding you, breathed once your name.
Bugler, Connor, thank you very much from Wongarei Boys High and the Wongarei District Brass Band. Thank you very much for attending. You have got a job here for life, young man. Right. Following the last post will be an ode. We've got Trevor here to say the ode, then a volley of 3 shots. There's likely to be very, very loud, so once Trevor's the sensuous voice is completed, just... oh, there we are. There's our flyover. We didn't get the timing quite right. There is that Air New Zealand flyover scheduled for later on today, but that's 1300, so we're not going to make that.
Bob. Yeah, Bob.
Eh?
Yeah, Bob.
That's Bob. Yeah, that's Bob. So he comes over every year. He probably got caught by the rain cloud. Okay, following the 3 shots, loud, there'll be a minute of silence, followed by the reveille. The reveille has 2 symbolic meanings. It symbolises the awakening of the dead and the next and better world, and rouses the living out of bed and back to duty after paying their respects to their fallen comrades.
For the fallen, they shall not grow old as we that are left grow old. Age will not weary them, nor the years condemn. And at the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We'll remember them.
Thank you, Trevor. You do that so well. Okay, we now have 3 shots from our high-powered rifles. Just might be quite loud. Even you jumped. Oh. Giveaway. Take your tray, yeah.
Where's the little baby? Where's the baby gone?
I ask you now to use a moment of silence for reflection, not just for the sacrifice of fallen New Zealand servicemen and women. Due to a technical issue, my Anzac Day speech in its entirety got lost, and there's some important things in that were very, very important to me. So as an epilogue, I've decided to do the whole speech again and for you to view and delete or fast forward as you see fit. Here we go. On this day we commemorate and reflect upon the events and sacrifices of the men and women who came from the uttermost ends of the earth. It is also a time to remember and to thank all those men and women who have served and answered the call and represented New Zealand in all armed conflicts since then. Sadly, it is also the time of yet another war in Europe. While it is highly unlikely that New Zealand will become involved directly in combat operations, be under no illusion that the Russian invasion of Ukraine has the potential to envelop the world in an unimaginable conflagration that the civilized world thought was of an era long past. For years we've seen iconic images and headlines of economic refugees fleeing to Europe seeking a better life. Now, in scenes reminiscent of 1939, we are witnessing refugees fleeing from a European country, fleeing from an unimaginable devastation and horror. With Putin threatening to go nuclear, Skynet might not be required to initiate Judgment Day. Let us all hope that a Russian Brutus or von Stauffenberg emerges from the shadows of the Kremlin long before that becomes a reality. My challenge, in wanting to bring a current focus to our Anzac Day, has caused me to really struggle with this presentation on how to interlock the present and past events together in a coherent structure, to show that the reality of war and warlike actions have an exponentially greater impact on the civilian population than the military one. My name is Kevin Judkins. I'm a Master Mariner, a Captain in the Merchant Navy. I'll do my very best to help you make sense of the historical background to the current war in Europe. A year ago I stood on this very spot and warned of Russia flexing its military might to intimidate its smaller neighbours, that the annexation of Ukrainian Crimea mirrored the German annexation of Sudetenland in 1938, that any such appeasement of Putin's demands over Ukrainian territory would be akin to the short-lived Munich Agreement of September 1938. As we all know, the ominous beating of the drums of war last year have since developed into smoke-filled clouds of war, raining death and destruction on a peaceful population. A population whose only crime is to be cursed by the accident of geography, to live next door to a nation ruled for centuries by inept, insecure, corrupt, and increasingly paranoid despots. Russia's 2014 seizure of Crimea from Ukraine violated international agreements such as the UN Charter, the 1975 Helsinki Accords, the 1994 Budapest Memorandum of Security Assurances for Ukraine, and the 1997 Treaty of Friendship, Cooperation and Partnership between Ukraine and Russia. If Putin has learned but one thing from history, it would be from the Molotov-Ribbentrop Non-Aggression Pact of 1939 between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. He has learned that any such agreement is not worth the paper it's written on. Operation Barbarossa taught Russian leadership that lesson very, very well. The pointless wanton destruction of Mariupol and Kharkiv mirrors the fate of Stalingrad, when the Russians were the lesser of two evils. 80-year advancement in weaponry, achieving that same level of destruction in 2 months, that which took a year for the Wehrmacht to achieve at Stalingrad. The modern-day siege engines being far more efficient in their destructive capabilities than the predecessors of past millennia. Just as the world was horrified in 1945 to learn of the true scale of evil perpetrated against a civilian population by an otherwise civilized Germany, so too has the revelation of mass graves and the deliberate targeting of civilian populations in Ukraine rightly shaken the conscience of the world populace. The country which has given us the music of Tchaikovsky and Shostakovich has now given us the horrors of Bucha, Kharkiv and Borodyanka. mirroring the actions of the Soviet NKVD in 1940 when they executed 22,000 Polish citizens in Katyn Forest in Poland. The leopard has not changed its spots in 80 years. Evil walks this earth in many guises, none more so personified than that of Vladimir Putin. In contrast, led by their Churchillian-esque president, the Ukrainian military are constantly reminding their Russian counterparts that Cossack blood flows strongly through their veins and that they have a proud heritage of giving back as good as they get. To quote a Ukrainian soldier nicknamed the Frenchman, Russian troops were taken aback when they came under fire. They expected bread and salt, a traditional Ukrainian greeting, but instead we met them with fire and sword. We Cossacks don't go on our knees for anyone, except for our mothers and our national flag. This isn't merely a war of independence, it's for European values. In linking past and present events, I focused on this photograph beside me. It's a photograph of a sculpture titled The Bitter Memory of Childhood. It's located in the Memorial Park in Kyiv at the National Museum of the Holodomor Genocide. The sculpture symbolises the memory of 3.5 million Ukrainian children who died of starvation in 1932 and 1933 during the Ukrainian genocide known as the Holodomor. The term Holodomor is derived from the Ukrainian words for hunger, holod, and the extermination, mur. Holodomor, extermination by hunger. A decade before the final solution, hunger was their poisonous gas, Stalin was their Hitler, Soviet Moscow was their fascist Berlin, the Holodomor was their Holocaust, and the Soviet Gulag their Dachau concentration camp. The Holodomor is the second recognised genocide of the 20th century, after the Armenian genocide of 1915-18. Both of these events relegated to historical footnotes by the brutal efficiency of the Third Reich's final solution. For the younger generation not familiar with the term genocide, Holocaust or final solution, Google it after the service and come and tell me what you've learned. Genocide is the deliberate killing of a large number of people from a particular nation or ethnic group, with the aim of destroying that nation or group. It is the systematic killing of people because the perpetrator doesn't like the idea of their very existence, or the God they worship, or their language, or the colour of their skin, or the way they do business, or the songs they sing and the clothes they wear, the very things which give people a sense of national identity. In a very simplistic definition, it is the result of racism taken to the absolute extreme. It can stem from either a superiority or an inferiority complex, or outright jealousy, where you possess something that I want and I'm going to kill you to take it, or simply that you are different. The population of Ukraine, the land of the Cossacks, has always identified themselves as a Central European people, like the Poles, not Russians. Ukraine possesses rich fertile soil, making it the agricultural breadbasket of Europe and the world. This is a resource which their larger eastern neighbour has always coveted and systematically taken by force. Ukrainian suffering at the hand of Russians is nothing new. It can be traced back to the Pereyaslav Council of 1654, where Russian troops occupied Ukrainian cities, where starvation became an effective tool of intimidation against the indigenous Ukrainian population. Fast forward 278 years, then a further 90 years, where we see history repeating itself in a macabre cycle of deja vu and death. While the effectiveness of weapons of destruction has evolved, starvation is still a simple weapon of choice in the Russian arsenal. After the end of First World War, Ukraine had a very short-lived independence until it was forcefully absorbed into the Soviet Union in 1919. Ukraine's peasant farmers resented the Russian presence and tried to restore Ukraine's independence. They were staunchly resistant to Bolshevik rule, particularly when Lenin and his associates wanted to receive Ukrainian bread and wheat free of charge. The Ukrainians refused to sell food without prepayment, causing Lenin to send in the military to steal the wheat at bayonet point. Quotes from Bolshevik leadership meetings at that time reveal that when plundering the Ukrainian wealth, no method was too extreme. Don't care that the starving die, 75% of the population will die, and if not, we will shoot them. Then 25% will be submissive. We need Ukraine itself. We don't need the people. When direct Russian control of land and cattle began in 1929, the Ukrainian peasant farmers actively resisted. Stalin saw their rebelliousness as part of the wider Ukrainian effort to overthrow Soviet rule. Not wanting to lose Europe's main grain supplier, he confiscated all the grain and land from the Ukrainian peasant farmers, deporting many of them to Siberia, thus creating an artificial famine. The country which previously produced the most grain in Europe were left without a crumb of bread. So began the Holodomor, where Stalin used starvation to crush the resistance of the Ukrainian people. At the peak of the Holodomor in the spring of 1933, over 24,000 Ukrainian people starved to death every day, a number far eclipsing that of the atrocities of the Third Reich a decade later. New Zealand is not amongst the 28 countries who recognise the Holodomor as a genocide against the Ukrainian people, in spite of a petition to Parliament in 2020 calling for it to do so. Our government's response to this petition was a Jacinda classic, a word soup of pontification overflowing with mealy-mouthed, pithy platitudes, such as, New Zealand has encouraged Ukraine and Russia to discuss the issue as parties directly concerned, and hopes that a resolution on how to acknowledge this tragedy can be reached in the future. Our Be Kind leader really needs to get off the fence. There is bugger all chance of that ever happening. There is a multinational force fighting for Ukraine made up of Polish, American, British and Canadian volunteers, similar to that of the international brigades fighting fascism in the Spanish Civil War of 1936. While New Zealand and Australia are sending humanitarian aid to Ukraine, anecdotally, there are likely some ANZAC volunteers also serving in military roles over there. I would like to think that at some stage in the future, these volunteers will be recognised in our respective countries for their services to Ukraine and to the world. I want to close this by quoting a small section of Ali Wiesel's 1986 Nobel Peace Prize acceptance speech. Ali Wiesel survived both Buchenwald and Auschwitz. We must always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. Sometimes we must interfere. When human lives are endangered, when human dignity is in jeopardy, national borders and sensitivities become irrelevant. Wherever men or women are persecuted because of their race, religion or political views, that place must, at that moment, become the centre of the universe. At this moment, that place, that centre of the universe, is Ukraine. Slava Ukraina, lest we forget. I ask you now to use this moment of silence for reflection, not just on the sacrifice of fallen New Zealand servicemen and women, but also for the people of Ukraine who are currently experiencing unimaginable horrors of war and war crime. I would also like to take this opportunity also for you to remember another stalwart of our local community who is no longer with us. Betty Webb passed away in August last year at the height of the COVID lockdown and was unable to be farewelled in a manner in which she so richly deserved. Betty was the most elegant and gracious woman I've ever met, with smiling eyes and the most radiant smile which would light up the whole room, the woolshed, the hayshed or the sheepyards. She was like a second mum to me. Trevor, Leanne, Sandra, Stuart, Murray, Arlene, we all share your loss and grief and wish for Betty that her spirit is flying high and free and forever dancing with Julia. Thank you, Betty, for your service to this community.